It was in a letter, a long letter, almost a confession, of a squire of a certain manor in Devonshire, I think, as far as I can find it. There was no address. It was written by one of the people involved, much later in life, when he was asked by his young nephew however he came into such a large establishment. It is a curious document, and what I read with some trepidation, the events in this small village near Chillington, I think there's an allusion to it, began, as far as I can see, in about 1815. In that date, to a certain manor house that had been rebuilt in the 18th century, according to the manner of the time, with some taste by description, although the child, as he is in this story, when writing much later, said that the old house had been knocked down because he had sold it to developers and moved to a far more convenient house. So that all we have left is his description, and he describes the kind of house that was the delight of the early Georgians, all light and marble, and not much comfort. It was designed apparently by his grandfather and dwelt in by a cousin of his, Mr. Abner. Now, Mr. Abner had no heirs, and if you look him up, as I did, you will find he was a notable scholar of his day, considered one of the greatest experts that Britain has ever produced on the religious beliefs of the late Roman period. He contributes a description of a sculpture he apparently had in the garden of Mithras, slaying the bull from which the serpent emerges, for the Gentleman magazine. And it sounds truly remarkable. And I read also that visiting his house was one of the sights of Devonshire, and it had a great temple that he had taken from Ephesus itself, complete with an altar on which incense was burning, amongst many other splendid things. Now, don't think all this detail, none of which is in the letter, all of which I found by scholarship, is somehow ancillary to my tale. It was to this great house, then, that a small child called Stephen arrived in 1815. His parents were now dead. Indeed, Mr. Abner had found out that Stephen was his one living relative, a likely chap of about 11. But we'll come to that detail in a moment. After a long and difficult journey, the young lad was carefully helped out of the carriage, and there he sat rubbing his legs on a cold day in November. Suddenly a man, little past middle age, came bustling up and said, Stephen, is it you? Pleased to meet you. Now, how old are you, my son? And before Stephen could reply, he said, Oh, what am I thinking? What am I thinking? Here is a child. Bring him possets. Bring him brandy. Bring him everything he needs to make him warm. The poor little chap has lost his parents, has he? And his feet and his legs are stiff. Oh, come, my housemaid. Come and look after this child that I bring you. By the way, how old are you? And it seemed so strange to Stephen that he was so worried about his age. But Stephen replied, Oh, I am 11. Next birthday. And when is your birthday? Oh, I know that. It's Hallows Eve. So let me get this straight. You are 10 now. And Stephen said, I suppose so, in a sad voice. Just then, Mrs. Prosner the housemaid, swept Stephen up and took him down into the warmest room in the house, the kitchen, and there thawed him and fed him crumpets and made him at ease. And then there came time for him to go to bed, and she led him up to the very top of the house, where most of the rooms were deserted. But there had been built for him, with a delicious fire, a beautiful bedroom of his own. And as he looked out the dark window, Mrs. Prosnor said, "Well, it might not seem much now, but you wait in the morning, there'll be sun, I'm sure, and you'll see all the grounds. You'll even get a peek of the temple from up here. It's so beautiful." And sure enough, when Stephen woke the next day, the warm Devon sun, even in winter, was coming through the window, streaming in, and he looked out and he saw a stream and a temple and everything to make his heart go warm. Well, he bolted out his breakfast and he was off playing in the garden. But as he played by wood and in the fields, just sometimes, from the corner of his eye, he wondered if he was quite alone. He seemed to see the dream of a boy and a girl, sometimes together, sometimes alone. And whatever he was doing when he saw them, his smile seemed to wither on his face. But he was happy enough. He came back for tea, having missed lunch altogether. And when Mrs. Prosnor said to him, "Well, did you like the garden, dear?" he said, "It's spiffing. Spiffing, spiffing, spiffing. You must thank my guardian, Mr. Abner, for having me here. I'm so pleased. Is he a good man? Will he go to heaven, do you think, for this act?" "Oh, he's as good a man as you could ever have. Have I not told you?" "Well, I haven't. You've only been here a night. With the 2 children he looked after. A little girl, oh no, that would be 20 years ago, soon after I came here. She was a little gypsy thing that he found in some market somewhere, abandoned by her people, they said. Phoebe she were, Phoebe Jenkins. And he came to had her at midsummer, and she lived here for 3 months, quiet and gentle in her ways. I thought she was going to be my apprentice. I had just come here. I was the maid of all works, but she was my maid. And then one day, it was round about September the 22nd, because I remember the master said that it would soon be the equinox, a time of mysticism. She just disappeared. Nobody ever saw her again. That night, men said they heard outside the gypsies singing, and it's my belief she went back to her people. But she didn't take any clothes, or money, or a payment. Just up and left. But they're strange, those folk, the travellers. And the next, it was 10 years later, a little Italian chap came playing his hurdy-gurdy up the drive, as happy as Larry he were, singing along his song, winding out his tune, and the master laughed and danced with him. Round and round he went. He gave the lad a gold sovereign and invited him in to tea. Now, I didn't speak any of that funny old Italian language, but the master did. He spoke to him carefully and considerately, and told me that the chap was going to come and live here, and that he was 12 years old, and that he would be here for a while. Well, we all made merry, for it was always nice to live with a musician, and that our master said he would join the equerry. But it was just the same. Round about March the 22nd that year, the master having had him come live with us at Christmas, the lad disappeared. But they're an unruly lot in them foreign lands. I expect he just had enough of us. But you know it were hard, because he didn't even take his hurdy-gurdy, and that was the delight of his life. Look, it's up there. The second part of the evening passed riotously, as they all tried to get a tune from the hurdy-gurdy, with differing successes. Well, Stephen soon settled down into the rhythm of the house. As winter came, as snows, he stayed more times indoors, reading happily by the fire, Robinson Crusoe, I believe, talking often to Mrs. Prosnor, looking out upon the grounds, thinking what he would do in spring, and occasionally Mr. Abner would come in and talk to him, but he understood his cousin was a very busy man. Although what he was busy doing, Stephen didn't like to guess, for often there was chanting coming from that room he had taken as his own. Once Stephen peeped in and saw a great dish of incense burning. Be that as it may. The year turned, and it was towards the end of February that Stephen first had his nightmare. He dreamt he was in his room, and then he dreamt he was just outside the room, walking as if in his sleep down the corridor to where, right at the end of the room, there was some sort of disused bathroom. Now he had peeped through the window and he knew that bathroom was empty, but in his dream he saw there was still a steel bath, a hip bath in it. And in it there was a girl, naked, about his own age, and she held her hands across her chest. And as he looked in, although her eyes were blue and her nails were as long as the long dead are, and her arms seemed more bone than skin, she raised up her arms, and in the dream he fainted to see what was under her chest, even though he couldn't remember it. And he started, and much to his relief, he was in his bedroom, but outside there was a sound like scratching at the door, and he dared look around. Well, it was 2 days later. Mrs. Prosnor had a word with him. "How could you have done that, Stephen? Look what you've done to your night clothes. What are you thinking of doing? What are you doing, playing with scissors in bed?" And she showed him his night clothes, and they were indeed torn over his heart, not through the fabric, but such as would take a very skillful needle to mend. Well, she scolded him, and he said, "Well, that's strange, but it's so strange. I didn't make those marks, but they matched the marks that appeared 2 nights ago on my door. At the same height, my heart height. Long scratches, 3. And Mrs. Prosnor insisted to go and see them, and when she saw them, she crossed herself, and said, "Now you be careful, good Stephen. Always say your prayers and never leave your room." "Oh, I don't, said Stephen again and again and again. Well, the year went on. It became March. And towards the middle of March, Stephen was sitting with Mrs. Prosnor when the butler came in. And the butler came in, not seeing he was there, said, "Well, that's the last time I'm going to the barrel at the end. There's something in there. I've told thee before, you always hear it around this time of year. A voice, muffled. In that last barrel, the barrel we don't put anything in since the master said it always went bad. Bad indeed. You know what are you talking about?" And Mrs. Prosnor said, "Shh, the butler. Mr. Humphreys. Don't you see Mr. Humphreys who is here?" And the butler turned and saw Stephen and said, "Oh, sorry, I was just talking about rats. There'd be Chinese rats down there in the cellar, and we all know that they're the rats that can speak." And he went off to his room, muttering to himself. Well, Stephen wasn't such a greengage as to believe what he was told by any manner of means. but he couldn't get anything more from Mr. Humphreys. Soon, than he would have liked perhaps, the wind got up, the wild equinox wind, and on March the 22nd, his cousin came and said, "Can I have a word with you, please, Stephen? Can I have a word? I want a word with you tonight. Come to my room, if you would, at 11 o'clock. I've drawn out documents to sign that will be great in your future, that will give you the future that you have, that will make you your destiny, my son." Well, Stephen thought to himself, this is a fresh adventure indeed. And he sat up that night, reading, looking out of his window. But it was strange. The boy and the girl he'd often thought he saw in the grounds seemed to be everywhere he looked. In the distance he could see them, hand in hand. Near the house he saw them, walking slowly towards it. He looked in the vegetable patch, and there again they were, this time their faces in a smile. And as they smiled, there was a sound, like a lost wailing, like some bird of prey might make, but no hawk would be awake at that kind of night time. And then he must have felt asleep, because he woke up. And as he woke up, he remembered the dream he had had. And in that dream, he thought he had seen the two children coming hand in hand to the great marble steps. And as he watched, the boy raised up his left hand in a gesture of pain and defiance. And as he raised up his hand, his chest was exposed, and there was a great gash in it, and the boy's heart was missing. And the girl still clapped both hands over a massive gash Stephen saw in the dream, where her heart had once been. And in the dream, but also waking him in reality, he heard a great scream, that wild sound, as of a lost soul. And he woke up at the window and he thought to himself, just as well I didn't fall out, I suppose. And he looked at the clock and it was just past 11. So he thought to himself, well, I'd better go. I'd better go. And he clattered down the stairs, running fast. But the carpets were thick, and Mrs. Brosner, who was the only person who slept near him, slept sound. He came in to Mr. Abner's room on the ground floor. There was the great door, and he could smell, everywhere there was the smell of incense. Beautiful incense that had been burning all day. And he tried to open the door, thinking, I must go in and apologise. But it wouldn't open. He pulled it, and then there was a sound, like a gurgle, horrible, like blood was choking someone. And then a strangled scream. And then two of that horrible high-pitched lost soul sound. And then a silence more terrible. Well, by now, Stephen was screaming. And Mr. Humphreys and all the men came running down, and none of them could open the door. And so Humphreys and two of the gardeners went round to the great French windows. And it was discovered they were quite open. And there were two sets of footprints going in. Footprints, many years later they told Stephen, were children's footprints. Children without boots, but without flesh either, said Mr. Humphreys. Without flesh, I tell thee. It was horrible to see. And there was Mr. Abner, lying upon a marble table, an altar if you like. And in his chest there was that peculiarly sharp, curved blade he always carried, priest-like, under his robes. And it was halfway through pulling out his heart. Now the coroner recorded a death of suicide. Mr. Abner was always thought to be a strange man. And Stephen, who was the only living heir, came into possession of the great house. Well, years later, he was going through Mr. Abner's paper when he was old enough to do it. And there he came across the curious document, stained still with a little of Mr. Abner's blood, for it had been found upon the altar. Now, let me tell you of the experiment that Trimestus himself writes down, citing the great Zeno, that this was an experiment that the ancients themselves did often, with a ready supply of servant boys and girls. You could do as much. They were civilized times indeed. Civilized times, I tell you. This experiment was for the truly philosophical mind. Trimestus himself says that if you devour the souls of 3 children before they are reached 13 years old, by the old method, he called it, and the old method I found in another work was devouring their hearts, burnt upon a stove and drunk in some heady wine, fruit of the gods. If you then devour their souls, those souls would be as a servant to you and grant you immortal life in this world. Immortal life. and I read of a very, very similar experiment. Zeno, they could say, could fly through the air, courtesy of a servant boy, a slave boy he had sacrificed to the gods. And one reads, of course, of Agamemnon, the mighty lord of Greece, who was not above sacrificing his own daughter so that he could command the wind. The truth of this seemed to me to be irrevocable, and so I have dedicated the great part of my life to fulfilling this experiment. 3 children I found, such as could be eliminated without any inconvenience to society. The first, a little gypsy child, Phoebe. Her body I laid upstairs in a bath. She was so quiet, the little thing, that it made me wonder whether the experiment would work at all. So I chose for my next child a wild child, an Italian. But it was the same outcome. I did away with him upon a march in 1805 and buried him in that far barrel in the cellar and said wine went bad there. The last child, who I will not need to hide, for great power beyond life and death will be mine, will be Stephen. Let his day be March the 22nd, 1815. And here let there be a record of it. And for any gentleman who follows me in my great experiment, let me warn you that you will be haunted by the ghosts, I suppose one must use that vulgar term, of those whose lives you shed so that you might have this power. But any philosophical man may ignore such psychic exuberances of the uninitiated. And of course, on the 3rd soul, all power will be yours. I greatly look forward to into it. And so Stephen said, when he read this document, he looked with horror at the house that he had come into possess some years before. And he sold it to the contractors, and they pulled it down and built him a modern Gothic-style mansion, often lambasted by the critics. But as he said, free of any ghosts but those I have put into it. For I was cured at a young age of wanting to live in anything old or inconvenient, or that served as a mirror for the past. Wise words, I think you will think indeed. Thank you. So those were the documents I found. If you're wise, you will learn from them. Good night.